Alright, welcome back to more progress. Some progress, any progress. Something I wanted to show you guys. I'm sectioning in this floor panel here, and you might tell yourself, well, that don't look so good down there. It's all pitted up, but honestly, it's not through the metal. I sandblasted it with my little siphon feed blaster there. And here's the patch panel. That's not weld through primer, that's epoxy. And the reason I'm using epoxy behind this is gonna set overnight or maybe a little bit longer. This part of the panel mates up with the top of the rocker. And there really isn't any good way to get any sort of corrosion protection in between that channel and where it spot welds to the top of the rocker. Now, the way this comes together, the floorboard has a lip on it that drops down behind the rocker and it spot welds to the rocker. The right way, probably the best way and only way to get all the rust out of everywhere in a situation like this is cut the rockers off of it in cab corners. Because the rocker goes underneath this B-pillar corner. This overlays it. Cab corner overlays all of it. The reason why I'm not doing this is because the rocker isn't rotten everywhere. It just had some real deep pits in it up here, and this stuff is solid. This is also an old work truck. If this was a restoration job, they'd take a different approach. I would pretty much force whoever's having me do this into doing the rockers and everything. That way I know I'm starting with fresh metal everywhere. All in all, it's pretty clean. But I just wanted to show you guys that little bit, because usually in between a panel you would put weld through primer, zinc type primer, but in this scenario I really have no way to get anything up and under that lip, and that I will show you here. Try not to show you guys too bad. The panel goes like that. Oh yeah, it's got a lot of pits in it out there, but we'll fix that up pretty. These aftermarket panels also don't match up real good. I had to put a slice in it back here to get this radius to match, and I had to slice it, I don't know if you guys can see that, I had to slice it in there too to make this line up over here, because I am going to weld those together. Do you have to? No, not really, because the weather strip covers it, and everywhere where you see epoxy in those plug weld holes, it'll all have to get cleaned out, and just around where the hole comes through the back of this panel as well. This also gets spot weld to a floor cross member or plug welded. You can see a gray dot in there. That's got epoxy on it, but I will clean it out around it, and then we'll put cavity wax up in there after I try and dribble epoxy behind it. It's the only way I know to do it. You can only reverse engineer this so far and get it to last as long as you can. The other thing I noticed, this panel, the way it was shaped, I thought maybe it was made to overlay the old floor, but there was just no way. Now you can see, got some epoxy down in there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that as tight as possible in there and either put some tacks across it or pack it with seam sealer after it's been epoxy primed all the way up. I want my seam sealer on top of that to fill any kind of gap. The cross member and the floor is right there. It's not like it's going to lose any structure from there to there, because it's also welded to the rocker. It's a different design than what a lot of rockers, how they're made. So this is how I'm going to do it. And for any of you doing these older body style Ford pickups, this one happens to be a cab chassis, but you're going to run into these floor panels and think this is the solution, and I don't know if it is or if it isn't. But to section a piece of floorboard in, the floorboard really didn't come with much more of a lip on it. Now I could have welded a lip along the back there, but if you look at the way the factory weather strip channel is made, it's just a separate piece of metal, and it spot welds to the top. That's actually a screw hole to hold down the wiring harness. but it's just spot welded all along here. And somebody came up with a panel that replaces this section that's prone to rotting out because all the crap lays down in here and then starts rotting it back. This truck has never had rubber floor mats in it. You can see he took a razor blade to him the day he brought it home from the dealer. And it just wore the paint off, and salt dripping off your boots and stuff, and bare metal, and getting in between this panel just wasn't good. So we're going to try, since this truck doesn't go out in the winter anymore, or very seldom, maybe to deliver some firewood, by putting that epoxy between the two panels, that we get some sort of longevity out of that. So I don't know if that'll help you guys, but that's just kind of what I ran into today. So hope everybody's doing good, and we'll catch you later. Oh, listen to the welder go. We're getting her in. A couple things I want to point out when you're fitting in a panel, especially inside the cab of a truck. It's my flame retardant welding protection blanket there. Just kind of got it draped up in here. I had it tucked up a little bit better, but definitely keep one of those on deck, and just in case, you never know. A fire extinguisher is a must. Now this truck, I have ground back a good 2 inches, maybe 3 inches, any of that Herculiner that was on the floor. Now don't be scared if you got a gap like that. The idea is, if you have clean metal on both sides and you have to clean it back that far on the back side too, or that will contaminate and cause blowouts and things of that sort. We're fitting pretty good up here. I got a little bit more of a gap than I'd like to have, but I'm going to beat it down and get it as close as I can. And another thing to keep in mind, once you get some nice tacks, that one grape aped on me, there must have been something in there, like that, you can just go back to back on them, turn your wire speed up just a little bit, it'll fill the gap. There's no worries in that. In a perfect world, you'd want a small, like 30 thousandths gap, but getting something with all these contours to fit perfect is not my strong suit. Although, you can see that these channels in the floor line up almost dead on. So a tight fit is crucial, but a little bit of a loose fit will not hurt you, because once you start tacking in place, especially with something like this that's got different angles, it goes up, it's going to start drawing tight, and it's going to close up your gap in other places, which can be good and bad. It can screw you sometimes, so I always keep, I don't know what I did with it, I have a little screwdriver or a pick. And sometimes if you put a tack down here and it starts drawing it up, you usually jump around with your tacks, but you can pry the gap open a little bit. And I keep this hammer handy too, and plenty of clamps and all that. But you can tap these down, and you want that metal to meet as close to level as you can, so it doesn't look all hodgepodge. And when you start grinding it, you're not grinding into the parent metal, you're just grinding the weld off. So this is what my tacks look like. To me, that's about as good as it gets for a tack right there. Nice and flat, not all built up. Practicing on the same gauge metal before you start helps, but a lot of times when you're jumping back and forth and you have a bigger gap, you turn the wire speed up just a tiny bit and give her a whirl. And when you're working on thin metal, sometimes you turn it up even more, especially over in this corner. Although that tack isn't very tall, those plug welds are way too tall, had way too much wire speed, but they're on there, not coming off. There's the welder. That's about what I go with as a start, somewhere between the 2 and the 3 for temperature, and somewhere between 40 and 50 wire speed. And this is 023 wire. It's very small wire. There we go. Get some out there. It's not very thick at all. Very flimsy wire. But that melts at a very low temperature, but yet you get plenty of penetration on the sheet metal. So I've got that much of it tacked right now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this part down so I can get these plug welds in so it fits tight. A lot of you guys chimed in on the first video and told me how much you really like these old body style Ford videos. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not a fan of these trucks, but it's growing on me. I don't know that I'll be owning one anytime soon, but this is kind of what I got. Remember the epoxy primer, and if you see down in there, I sandblasted inside that hole before I put this down. I set the panel down, I put a Sharpie dot on there, a little black mark, and then I sandblasted it all out because that metal is a little pitted, and I had brushed epoxy on it yesterday, so I wanted to make sure. Now, some of that epoxy will smolder underneath there. It's not the end of the world, but in a situation like this, I would rather have epoxy in between my panels than weld through primer, and here's why. Unless you're going to run a bead of seam sealer across the front of this, any rust that gets in between this panel is going to bleed out onto that rocker, and it's going to look like crap. Now, is it going to rust? Oh hell yeah, of course it's going to rust. Everything rusts sometimes. But what I will do is, when it's all said and done, I'm not going to seam seal in between where these panels meet, and I do have a gap on the back because the old floor is cut off, and now this is the part that comes down, but it stops right here. It doesn't go to the rocker anymore, so there's a little gap. I will fill that with epoxy. You can dribble it in the backside the best you can. Wear safety goggles and a respirator, and take some real low pressure air, like 5 pounds. You can even just let it wick in, but sometimes I'll take a blowgun and try and get it to wick across. Just depends on the situation. I want to try and prolong this as much as possible, maybe get another 5 to 10 years out of this truck, at least this repair for sure. So that's how I do it. I'll bring it back and show you guys what it looks like when I start dressing the welds, or maybe after I've dressed the welds, and show you what I use. Alright, the panel's in, and I'm at this point where I've ground a bunch of the welds down. I'm not all the way down, but I don't know if you can see that. There's a black circle. There's actually a pinhole through there, and I'm holding a flashlight underneath it. It's easier if I shut the lights off to see it, but I've circled all of those, and what I'm going to do is go along and fill them all up. But it's 85% ground down. I got some work to do up in there to make it nice, and where those plug welds are. Now you can do this one of two ways when you're done. You can put fiberglass filler over the top of this, or you can leave it. This is going to get that bed liner over it, so I will sand it all up, prep it, get whatever rust I find back off of it, and epoxy prime it. So just wanted to kind of show you how that fits in there. Beautiful it is not, but after I dress up some welds here and get the paint on it, she will be good to go. So just figured I'd give you that, and probably tomorrow in the next video, you won't know what day it is, but hopefully tomorrow I will have epoxy on this and we'll be moving on to something else. Take care.